Greeting internet friends, welcome to another exciting episode with Dabblin with Dan. Behind me is my 1999 Harley Davidson motorcycle. The type is FLHTP1. I purchased this at an auction and my stator has failed, and the stator is used to charge the battery. And I went ahead and went online and purchased a new stator, and that's what that looks like. Of course, it's in the bag. To put it on though, I got to remove the primary. So the first thing I did is I removed the shifters as well as the foot peg so that I can have easy access to the primary. Earlier, I went ahead and drained all the fluid out of here through a small access screw, so there's no fluid in here. Now, the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is reposition the camera so you guys can get a little bit closer. So these bolts are 3/16 inch, and I'm going to go ahead and begin to remove them by loosening them. And what you can see is one is a little bit longer. The longer ones go on the back side and bottom of this primary. Now, since all the primary bolts are out, I'm just going to get a nice little tap and then pop that off and set that off to the side. Now put a gasket here. All right. So this is the clutch assembly. This is a chain tensioner. The stator is behind this piece here. So this is called the compensator assembly. And what we're going to have to do is, I want to go ahead and loosen the chain tensioner because eventually all this will have to come out. Now this is a 9/16 nut. And I'm going to remove this completely and set it on my work table. And there's a couple things going on here. So this is how you adjust your clutch. And that is not 9/16. So I have this tool here that I'm going to use to remove this. Now I've already loosened this nut up earlier. I've actually taken the primary off. So I'm just going to back this out. Set that on my workbench. Okay, We have a compression. Now I've got safety glasses on. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. And I'm going to try to keep all these parts in order. And then I'm going to pull this on out, okay? Now we got a couple things going on here. I want to go ahead and loosen this. I believe it is a 1 1/2 inch. Now this is going to be to loosen righty tighty, lefty loosey, and this one is the opposite. So to go right, it's not tightening, it's loosening it. I also have this locking key that I can put in place to prevent this thing from slipping. As I I'm going to go ahead and pull that off and set that on my workbench. Now this nut is 1 3/16, and again it's going to be the opposite than the righty tighty, lefty loosey. All right. So that came out pretty easy. Now the next thing I have to do is remove the clutch assembly, and because I've already loosened that up, everything should just come straight out. And I'm going to lay it on my towel that I have here off to the right. Okay, so looking inside here, to remove this outer casing, there are special tools that you can get in here to help pull this out. But what I discovered was, I went through my nuts and screws and bolts and found a couple screws here that I'm just going to screw in there. To help me pull this off. Now, the stator has a bunch of magnets, and this is kind of hard, so I just got to wiggle it back and forth. To remove it. I'll set that. So here's my stator assembly. And when I got to look in here, this is definitely burnt in this area. And what had happened was the stator goes through a voltage regulator, and the voltage regulator has wires that go to your battery. And sometime last year, the vibration of the motor rubbed the insulation off one of the wires going to the battery, and it shorted out to my block. And then of course, then shorted this out. Okay, so now I've got to remove this stator, and what happens is there's wires that come through this and go to the voltage regulator, and I went ahead and cut them off here just to make it very easy for me to remove this. Now these, turn them counterclockwise will loosen them. I'm going to loosen all 4 of them first. I'm going to remove these 4 bolts and put them in my little bucket. I will not be reusing those because the new stator came with new ones that also have Loctite on them. And then I'm just going to grab this old stator and wiggle it out. And again, it's got a plug that I cut off, but that's the old stator. We'll set that off to the side. Now, there is a hole that goes through here that you have to feed the other wires, and I'll pull the new stator out. Okay. So one thing you'll see is the wires are on this side, and this is going to be the part that goes towards the motorcycle. And these wires don't have the plug on because you have to recycle the old one. So now we're going to go ahead and install the stator. But prior to doing that, I'm going to apply some red gasket sealer to this plug, which will help prevent any oil from seeping through, but also give it just a little bit of lubrication. So it actually will serve a couple purposes. So I'm just applying a little bit to the top part here. Now, these wires have to be rotated this way for this to feed through here. It might be hard to see, but really got to pull these wires through one at a time. Then I need to align the new bolts. Look at that one. So these screws are 5/32. I'm going to just do a crisscross pattern to help draw that stator in evenly. I'm going to go ahead now and snug these bolts down. There you go. Now the new stator is in. The next step will be to, these have been torqued down. I'm going to go ahead and put my rotor back on. I'm just going to make sure there's nothing inside there, and what you can see, there's just a series of magnets in there. And this shaft has raises and valleys, so I want to make sure I line that up. Needs to be at the right angle, just like so. Okay. I'll remove those. Make sure this thing is on. and then this is followed by a washer. Went ahead and installed the washer, and it's flush. Before I go ahead and put on the clutch and compensator assembly, I'm going to go ahead and make sure these threads are clean. And the tip of the day is I usually will take an old toothbrush and just use it to go ahead and clean any dirt or grime that's on there, followed by a clean cloth and clean that up. All right. Now, as I prepare to put the assembly back on, I'm going to go ahead and move this chain tensioner bolt up and just let it hang about midsection. So this is the compensator assembly and this is the clutch assembly. And there's this bolt right here that I'm going to pull on out, and as you can see inside there, I'm going to take that toothbrush and clean these threads out because I want no dirt in there. And then of course I'm going to then put red Loctite in there, and the clutch assembly has this nut, and I'll do the same thing. I use the toothbrush to clean out the threads, and then followed by a clean towel to get any dirt and debris out of there. And I will also apply red Loctite to this. So I'll apply my red Loctite. And of course this nut here is the clutch assembly nut. Now the fun part, putting the clutch assembly and compensator assembly back on, which is, this unit's actually pretty darn heavy. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the chain tensioner on. And once I have that, I can then slide this up. And then of course, the compensator assembly, I'll have to get everything on the grooves. And now it's time to tighten. I'm just going to hand tight the compensator assembly. I'm going to make sure my clutch assembly is all the way on, and then put that nut on. Okay, in regards to my chain tensioner, I'm going to go ahead and get my socket, which is 9/16, washer and nut. And I'm going to go ahead and lift my tensioner to tension up the chain while I tighten down my clutch assembly nut and my compensator assembly nut. All right, I purchased a torque wrench, and for the compensator assembly, they want me to torque this down to 100 foot-pounds first, and then to 175 foot-pounds. So the socket size for this is 1.5 inches. And if you notice this, when I begin to tighten it, the assembly starts to turn. So I'll put my locking tool in here to keep that from happening. And I want to get in a good position. All right, so there's 100. Then what they want you to do is back off, and of course you'll have to remove this locking tool, put it up on top. So that's backed off. Now I'm going to set my torque wrench to 175. $160, 175. Now, as I begin to tighten, I'm going to have to remember, I'm going to have to move that locking tool back down here and put a lot of weight. Wow, that was tough. Now I'm just going to go ahead and reverse just to get my locking tool out. I'm going to remove that socket and replace it with my 1/3/16 for my stator. Now this was clockwise to tighten. This is going to be counterclockwise to tighten. And they want this nut to be torqued down to 70 to 80 foot-pounds. So there's 70. There's 80. I'll put my locking tool in here. And there we go. Get my locking tool out. And now I want to adjust my chain tensioner. Now my chain actually is in a pretty good, you got about maybe a 1/4 inch sag in it. Well, that's plenty. Okay, now I'm going to proceed by putting this piece back together, which requires this, and it has the word out, so I want to make sure that's on the outside, and there's these little grooves that this fits into, and I'll slide that in like so. Now I'm going to go ahead and insert this, which is going to be my clutch adjustment. And I'll show you how to adjust a clutch. So now my this says out, And I'm going to go ahead and put my snap ring washer back in so that stays in place. And again, I have my safety glasses on because these things can fly out. I'll make sure it's seated in the groove, and it is. I just want to rotate it a little bit. All right, now this is my clutch adjustment, and I'm going to go ahead and screw this in until it bottoms out. And back that washer, this nut all the way out. So what I feel is, I feel tension right there, okay? Now, it's 1/2 turn all the way out. And then I'm gonna use this nut to lock it in place. And it is 11/16. Give that a nice little snug. All right, and that's locked in place. Now I'm going to take a moment to clean any dirt and debris off of this. And then just take another look to make sure I have my chain tensioner nut is good and tight. Go ahead and get my socket, make sure that is. My compensator assembly is torqued down to 170 foot-pounds, and my clutch assembly nut is torqued down to 80 foot-pounds, and the book is anywhere from 70 to 80. So at this point, all this is back in place. Now it's time to put a gasket up and put my primary cover on. So let's do that. So I purchased this brand new gasket, and it's recommended that whenever you remove your primary cover that you always replace with a new gasket. There's a couple pins that this will hang on, so you want to go ahead and make sure that happens. And then as I look, I want to look around just to make sure all my holes are lining up, and they are, before I go ahead and get my primary back in place. Now if you remember, I had my trusty little jar here, and I'm going to go ahead and set aside my long and short primary bolts. So it appears that I have 5 long ones and 5 short ones. Now my primary cover is good and clean, and I'm going to go ahead and set it into place. Now I hand tighten a few of these primary cover bolts, because before I get them all torqued down, I want to make sure I have them all inserted to to where the gasket holes line up. And we'll go over the torque sequence here in just a moment. Now I personally like just to kind of hand tighten down all of these first. So let's take a moment and do that.